Well, out of all the aftermarket enhancements you can do to make this plane look awesome, I would say the engine is definitely the hardest of them all. It's got the most parts, they're all very small, it's got a lot of lead wiring that you have to glue and twist all throughout, and it's all jumbled into a tiny little area. I start out by chopping off a large chunk of resin on the engine block, as well as some other thin areas around the hoses and tubing. It's rather difficult to hollow these sections out since they're so thin, but a drill bit and a sharp blade will do the trick. The tolerance with these resin parts is really tight, so it's important to get a good clean cut. A lot of times I'm using a really thin razor saw and then sanding down the last little bit so that it's really smooth. It did not take long for this build to become difficult. The wiring and tubing are a bit tedious, so I try to set the wires in place with thick super glue, and then I come back with some extra thin super glue to get a stronger bond. And I do this to minimize the glue usage, and because the thin glue disperses better and is going to be less visible in the end. You only get one shot to get this right, and you don't want to accidentally cut along the wrong panel line, so I mark it up. I start with power tools, then I move to a knife, and then sandpaper as I get closer and closer to the panel line that I'm cutting up against. And what seems like it should be a simple cut is not as simple as it seems to get it clean and flush so everything fits perfectly. There's a lot of light sanding involved just so I can get everything at a perfect 90-degree angle and that it'll all fit together smoothly. The NATO black color adds some highlights that appear almost light gray against the flat black background. A little bit of dry brushing with an old crappy brush brings out some of the textures that had become too dark and shaded. I've purchased a handful of aluminum colors over the years trying to find a favorite to use with a paintbrush. I've had success with all the ones that I'm using in this video, and I usually just grab whichever bottle is closest to me. That always leads to a little bit of color variation, which is what I'm looking for between the different objects that I'm painting. Out of habit, I gloss coated the whole thing, but there's not much you can do with the panel wash over a black engine though. Oh well, in the end it was kind of easy to paint, which was a nice change from every other aspect of putting this thing together. I attached most of the engine pieces to the aircraft near the end of the build, so it's hard for me to estimate how long I spent on the engine alone. It was a long time though, and was one of the first things I started and the last things to finish. And by the way, Edward had great customer service here because I was missing a single piece And so I sent them a note and they mailed me a new part with no questions asked. Ideally, I like to attach all the wiring and anything that needs to be glued before I start painting it, but with the compact nature of the engine, that's just not possible for everything, and that's what makes this one of the harder pieces of the aircraft to build. Some of this lead wiring that I attached at the end, I didn't even bother painting because I like the slight color variation, and why paint something metallic when it's already metallic to start with. And at the last minute, as usual, I saw something I didn't like, and so I changed the color of the support frame. You can do yourself a favor and paint it the correct color before you glue it to the model and attach everything around it. And that's it, I'm finished. Everything magically came together in the end. I've got several other videos on this airplane, so please check out the links in the description below. You can check out the gun bays, the cockpit, and the full build of the whole aircraft. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll be back with more.